cold and damp today, driven in from the shop. It was too much. So it seemed a good time to skip forward chronologically and come to a light read, a youth read, I guess. One of the first ones I penned, and it finally takes us to a ponytail. It's entitled, "Oh, a Handful of Oats Now and Again." Why did I start this way? When Mother would announce that Uncle Clarence was to arrive with some city guests, I'd dance with excitement. Clarence was a large man with what seemed an ever-changing wife and a different brood of children. "Is this wife Betty?" I'd ask. "No, dear, Betty was his first wife. This is so-and-so or such and such," Mum would reply. I gave up trying to keep it straight and just made do with yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and the like. Clarence would arrive in a large white station wagon that groaned contentedly as he and his just as inevitably large wife and entourage disembarked. Bear in mind this was well before the days of mandatory child seats and lap belts. The white behemoth would pour out not only he and his wife, but inevitably another couple, perhaps a neighbor or something-in-law, and their brood as well. It seemed akin to a tiny circus car that spews forth endlessly a dizzying array of entertaining characters. After introductions were made all around, the adults would settle back with cold beverages and lawn chairs under the cool shade of the sugar maples lining the drive. I'd round up a couple of ponies and bring them into the house yard for the girls. The ponies would be treated to endless carrots, apples, and sugar cubes. Manes and tails festooned with ribbons and curry-combed near to death. Squealing with delight, their cries of "Can we ride them?" would be answered with "Yes, girls, after supper when it's cooler." The girls contentedly ensconced, I'd then lead the boys on a farm tour, inevitably ending with my beloved little 9N Ford tractor. I'd regale them with tales of heroic proportion. I'm sure they went back to the city and told their buddies they'd seen the only farm tractor that ever jumped over the moon. Then we'd go down to the pond and throw rocks at the frogs until the heat drove us back to the shade of the house yard. Refreshed with dripping cold cans of pop and fat slices of watermelon, we'd head to the front yard for a boisterous game of Johnny Pop-Up 500. Remember that baseball game? The girls would still be clucking contentedly about the ponies, by now so beribboned it's hard to ascertain the gray one from the black. At the call to dinner, we'd all dash to the kitchen and jostle into place. Heaping plates of endless variety would belabor the table. Uncle Clarence would regale us throughout our repast with one tale after another, each one taller than the next. At meal's end, Clarence would lean back and say to my father, "Well, Lorne, do you think you've got a pony around here for these girls to have a wee ride on?" The girls would squeal with delight, and I'd be a quiver with anticipation. The real fun was just about to begin. With a twinkle in his eye, Dad would inquire as to whether I thought I could perhaps round up a suitable steed. I'd respond, "Yes, Dad, I'll go get old lady." "Old lady," Clarence would boom out. "Is she still alive? Well, I believe I rode her myself as a kid." Mother, entering the game, would reply to the effect that "No, Clarence, we've no ponies left that old." Nonetheless, Clarence would loudly proclaim, "That mare must be as old as the hills." Dad would shoot me a wink, and on cue I'd be off like a shot to fetch old lady. As I raced away, I'd hear Clarence loudly pontificating as to the pony's advancing years. I knew by the time I'd returned he'd have portrayed her as if not entering Noah's Ark, at the very least exiting it. I'd go out, throw a bridle on the old lady, jump on her bare back, and trot up towards the house. Out of sight behind the barn, I'd jump off and lead her the rest of the way up to the house yard. By the time I had old lady saddled, she gave off the appearance of indeed having departed the ark. Feet splayed, head hanging down, even her gleaming black coat seemed to somehow lose its luster. Excuse me. By now, Clarence had old lady predating the ark. To listen to him, you'd have come to think she must be the Eve of the entire equine species. Old lady played her role as to be worthy of an Academy Award. With each pass around the farmhouse, it would seem she aged yet another decade. As I loaded the last wee lass aboard, it would appear she swayed under her burden. Dubious glances were now being cast about. Some of the girls would be near to tears. Clarence continued to loudly paint old lady with the brush of advancing years. As old lady and I rounded the house for the last time, she'd stumble over her front hooves and wobble wearily to a stop. By now her chin was near on the ground, and I imagined she'd have fooled even an experienced horseman. Our guests would now be aghast. I'm sure they're all of a mind the poor old mare was about to expire before their very eyes. Mum would step up. Well, Scotty, maybe old lady's a little more worn out than we thought. Perhaps you'd best go out and round up a younger one. Dad, unsaddle the poor old girl and give her some oats before you go get another pony. Old lady seemed to be not even aware of her surroundings as I unsaddled her. Clarence added to the tension by being uncharacteristically silent. Presented with a pail with some oats at the bottom, old lady would seem at first to be too weary to even have the wherewithal to even express any intent. Excuse me. A sad and sullen silence had descended upon the assembly. Lady seemed to struggle as her head went into the oat bucket. The boys shuffled their toes in the dust. The girls' lips trembled as they fought to suppress their tears. Old lady began to snuffle up the oats, and by the time she was rattling with the bottom of the bucket, it seemed as if we were witnessing a genuine miracle. The old mare's years seemed melting away before her eyes. Her posture straightened, her tail began to swish vigorously about. Her coat seemed to take on a sheen that was a thing of beauty. We all stood about transfixed, as if it were the oats were the fountain of youth. As old lady rattled the bottom of the bucket, those of us in the know, Mum, Dad, and Clarence and I, would be now struggling to contain ourselves. The oat bucket now empty, old lady would fling it across the yard and dash towards the fence. A collective gasp arose as the old mare galloped headlong in a seemingly suicidal rush towards the fence. I mean, the page wire fence taller than the pony, right? Then at the last minute, vaulted effortlessly, the page wire raced across the barnyard, mane and tail streaming behind her. Clouds of dirt flew from her flashing hooves as she whinnied loudly as she rounded the barn and disappeared from sight. The astonishing silence was broke as Clarence's buddy said, "What in the Sam hell's in them oats?" Mum and Dad and Clarence and I would, to coin a phrase, fall about the place. Our city guests, realizing that they were no doubt not the first to be duped by our elaborate charade, joined in our merriment. The boys resumed their inherited good-natured roughhousing, and the girls skipped about the yard, eager in anticipation of yet another pony and more laps around the farmhouse. As twilight was impending, Clarence would load up his entourage in preparation of departure. Thank yous, hopes to see ye again. Like were exchanged as the beleaguered old station wagon coughed into life, belching blue smoke. "Do you think that old mare will be up for some more rides next year, Lorne?" Clarence bellowed as the old wagon shuddered into gear with a resounding clunk. "Oh, I imagine so. A handful of oats and now and again seems to do wonders for the old girl," Dad responded. We could hardly hear the wagon's springs groan in protest as it wallowed down the drive. What for the laughter?